I think it's what, $140 billion that they're spending on the stage three tax cuts for high income individuals. They're
That's
permanent.
permanent.
Yeah.
That one's permanent.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in a nutshell, you see literally both the quantity and quantum of spending for rich people, which are going to be primarily men, because men primarily earn more than women, versus spending on women's safety, women's health, domestic violence, that sort of thing. And tax cuts sound good. Everyone wants a tax cut. But if you flip it around and you look at it in terms of, well, that's $140 billion of revenue that the government is basically sacrificing, that they won't be able to spend on health or education or defence, if that's your thing, or
Yes.
women's health, women's safety, that's revenue foregone that cannot now be spent on nation building and society building and the vision stuff that is missing from this budget.
Let's put that in perspective, because it's a good point. We're committing $140 billion so that people earning $200,000 a year will be $9,000 a year better off. That's for people who are just at the cutoff, let alone those who earn more than that. But $140 billion, that is more than we estimate we need to completely upgrade the transmission lines, the switching technology nationwide, so that we can shift to 100% renewable energy across the country. We could move aggressively with less than that amount of money. So New South Wales has committed $32 billion to upgrade its infrastructure, its transmission lines, its switching technology, so that rooftop solar farms, wind farms, batteries, snowy hydro, etc., can use a more distributed energy network, energy generation into the future. So over, I think, 10 years, a 10-year time frame, Matt Keane committed that $32 billion. That's in New South Wales. Now, New South Wales has roughly the largest infrastructure spending required. Places like Queensland would also have significant infrastructure spend, Victoria as well, South Australia, West Australia, Northern Territory, Tasmania, far less so. If we call it 100 billion, give or take, we absolutely come out ahead. And we put in place a vision for Australia, which is green, clean, emissions-free, carbon neutral, and actually sets us up to start doing things like green hydrogen, low emissions aluminium, low emission steel, low emission concrete, like all of these things that we know there will be international markets for. We know there will be domestic markets for. We know will help workers in coal, oil, and gas industries transition. They're good, high-paying jobs. They're not, they're not the same type of work. There will be training involved, but a coal miner won't have a job in coal. This is the last generation that will have jobs in coal, whether they like it or not. The markets are drying up. The demand is drying up both domestically and overseas. A coal miner's child will not work in coal. They need to find other industries, and the sorts of industries that we can give them will be reliant on green, emission-free energy that's renewables. For the same money that we're giving away in tax cuts to people who already have a minimum $200,000 a year, we could transform our nation's energy infrastructure into something that really does set the country up for the future. When we talk about lost opportunities, that one is absolutely at the top of the pile.
And the thing that people overlook when you compare $140 billion in tax cuts versus, say, $100 billion that we're about, we could invest in a green transformation, is that investing in the green transformation then drives economic activity. And
Yes.
so we won't actually end up spending $100 billion on a green transformation, because we're probably going to get about $80 billion in economic activity back on that.
Well, the estimates are actually that you get back more than you put in. This is one of the interesting things that's been modelled out by a whole variety of groups. And I think the Australia Institute is one of them, but the Climate Council of Australia is another, where they look at, well, what does that investment in a green recovery look like? And the answer is that for every dollar we put in, we get more back.
Incredible.
versus tax cuts to the rich
Mm.
don't.
No, I mean,
For every
tax,
dollar you give away to tax for the rich gives you what, 20 cents maybe in return?
if you're lucky.
Maybe.
And the key thing is that the rich don't spend their tax cuts. They
Well,
save
they're
them.
already spending. They're already spending as much as they need, like
Mm,
give or take. And look, the people maybe people who are at the lower end of that bracket. Like we're talking 200,000 and above.
mm,
The people who are earning 200,000, sure, maybe some of them spend that extra money. Maybe they do. Maybe they spend it domestically rather than an overseas holiday. Maybe they spend it on a domestically produced good rather than buying something that's imported from overseas. All of that kind of stuff is a big maybe.
mm.
But the higher up those tax brackets you get, or the higher up those income brackets that you get, the more likely you are that that person is already spending as much as they feel like. And
Yeah.
the rest of it, they just invest or save.
So, I mean, tax cuts to lower and middle income taxpayers are an
Those
economic
pay
benefit.
off every time. Those
Yeah.
pay off.
Mm.
Yeah. And by comparison, so we've got the low and middle income tax offset, which has
Very
been
much.
extended at a cost of $7 billion. So 1/20th of the stage three tax cuts that we were just talking about, $7 whole billion. Um, they've been extended for one more year. It's $1,080 per person. That's great, but it's only for this financial year. Again, like
Mm.
it's going to disappear. That person in 12 months' time, their hip pocket is going to see a decline of probably $900. They'll get a little bit from the tax cut, but overall they're going to be down. Versus someone who's earning $200,000 a year, which, as I said, like is going to see a $9,000 improvement.
You're looking at people that have already probably struggled in the past 2 years.
Of course.
Your high income earners, they didn't go on an overseas trip. I didn't go on a business trip. I didn't do anything like that. Actually, probably been
Yeah.
all right the past 2 years overall. Yeah,
Mm.
they probably lost a bit of money, but overall, probably still doing all right. Your low income earners is where we've seen it hardest here. And so to go, here's your $1,000 back, it's like, well, that's $1,000 that I actually need.
Yes.
That's ultimately what it is. So there's almost like this sense of being grateful for it, but that's actually the standard basic level that we need, that's being handed out like it's, here's your gift that we're giving back to you.
Be thankful.
Yeah.
And again, I think this is one of the big differences when we talk about what a Labor budget might look like versus what this one looks like. A lot more money would have gone to low and middle income earners. I would hope, and I think for political reasons, the Labor Party aren't touching this at the moment, but I would hope that they would raise the job seeker rate, because it certainly should be raised.
Yeah.
$43.57 a day is well below the poverty line. And as we've talked about earlier, we're using those people as a buffer against inflation. They shouldn't be furnished for it.
Just to put that $43 and however many cents into context, the amount budgeted to pay for people in hotel quarantine is $65 a day. And that is people living in quarantine, and it's basically just covering their food expenses and everything like that. And that's $65.
Right.
Oh my
But
God.
yeah, and you're getting, here's your $43.
The thing that the pandemic has taught us is that we can raise job seeker to just below
Of
the
course we
minimum
can.
wage, and people will still go and search for work. They,
Of course they will.
with a stroke of a pen, we can raise thousands of people out of poverty with no detrimental effect on the economy or on society.
Yeah.
In fact, the effect on society is massively beneficial because you're raising people out of poverty. But the cost of doing that, look, let's just round it up to $10 billion, right?
Be
Because
generous.
be
Go
generous.
for it, Elena.
I admit I
Yeah.
did not do the sums before we came on board. So probably actually going to end up being a lower amount to raise job seeker to say $80 a day.
Mm.
But again, that will pay for itself because those people will spend that money, as they've proven
Every
during the
cent.
pandemic. Yeah, they will spend
Every
every
last
cent
cent.
that we give them. And then that flows into the economy, that flows into job creation and all the good things that
And you know
giving
what they
tax
spend
breaks
it on? They spend it on things like being able to send their kids to school with lunch every day. They
yeah,
spend it on being able to celebrate a birthday without feeling ashamed. They spend it on things like being able to buy clothes that aren't secondhand, that aren't torn, that aren't used by somebody else. I mean, These aren't luxuries,
No.
but
And
every last penny of that is raising that person's sense of self, giving them a sense of dignity, and giving them a quality of life that is the bare minimum of what we would want for someone in Australia.
Or
and
young, we would particularly seeing that, like say you university students living out of home or young people living out of home, you know, young families and that sort of thing, people just trying to get their feet basically. Pandemic hit, there was a decent amount of investment immediately, and so you got the funding there for a short period of time. After, what you're now seeing is that the burden is being put onto you, not for profits, it's been putting onto university groups. I know at my we've now set up a pantry so people can go there and get basics of rice and bread and that sort of thing, but the burden's actually on those external systems. Like, instead of where it should be in terms of the government isn't doing enough to actually support low income earners, young people.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of what the COVID supplement that was given to the vulnerable and the unemployed during the pandemic was spent on was things like going to the dentist for the first time in years, buying the medications they need. The effect it had on their mental and physical health was astonishing. It was transformative.
Yes.
And the government has ticked the box on mental health, and they do have some actually really good initiatives around mental health. But again, it's dealing with the symptoms, but not the root cause. If you wanted to fix the root cause of poor mental health in this country, you would lift thousands of people out of poverty and give them security, give them a sense of dignity, give them a sense of hope and a sense that they have a future that they can work toward. At a stroke of a pen, helps solve a lot of mental health issues in this country.
Absolutely.
You know,
financial stress is a huge cause of mental health issues. It's a huge cause.
This is the thing I find frustrating about this budget is, as you said, completely lacking in the vision thing. And they're sort of throwing money at political problems without actually seeking to cure the root cause of that problem, which annoys me.
That's exactly what it is. It's political problems. It's trigger words that are going to get a response out of people. It's that we've now had rape allegations within Parliament. And so, okay, we'll have the ladies' budget so that, you know, basically it'll cover up the issue. We had a aged care commission, so we'll shove a whole heap of money at it, not actually putting it into what it needs to be going into, but it'll cover the problem. It is all just Band-Aid fixes, this whole budget.
I mean, you're right, Rhiannon. I think that observation that this budget is around addressing political issues rather than economic or social or environmental issues is spot on. You can see that in so many different areas.